So, Sue, first and foremost, I mean, I guess it's effectively the end of your first term as leader of the council, isn't it? Not a job I would imagine you were necessarily expecting to have 4 years ago, before the elections in 2012.
No, it wasn't. I was quite happy as deputy leader. I was extremely happy to hold my seat 4 years ago, and then having to step up to the leadership role was a challenge.
Absolutely. I mean, the political landscape's changed an awful lot since then, hasn't it? I mean, locally, but nationally particularly, but locally as well. There were, certainly from your point of view as the ruling group on the council, there were 2 Lib Dem MPs, one in Cheadle, one in Hazel Grove. They've both lost their seats for us. Does that affect the way in which the council operates? Does it affect you?
Not particularly. The council is the council. Obviously, we worked well with the MPs. We tried to work well with all the MPs for the area, including, obviously, for Stockport and Denton and Reddish, which comes into the area. We would always want to work proactively, help them with when they have issues, but also keep them informed about what the council's doing. So that hasn't changed.
Yeah. Does it make it easier, though, when it's an MP of the same party to have that relationship, have that dialogue? Does it make it easier to work? Perhaps that link with local government, with central government. Yeah.
On a personal level, it helps if you know people. But actually, I have met all of the MPs. And no, I think it can be a professional relationship. Sometimes, obviously, if you're in the same party and the council's doing something that the MP's unhappy with, they can grumble a bit more.
Absolutely. I mean, there's lots of big changes, of course, that have come in over the last 4 years and will continue to come in. One of the biggest, of course, last week, NHS devolution for Greater Manchester. A good thing for Stockport, do you think?
I believe so. I believe that we're a highly centralised country. And if you look at Greater Manchester, the health outcomes for the money that's been invested over the years is very poor. We have very poor levels of health compared to some other parts of the country. So the current system wasn't working. So I know we call it devolution, it's really delegation, a delegation of powers back down locally, not just to the councils, of course, but to the hospitals, to the GPs, to the people involved in providing health services and social care. I think we can do a better job. I believe that firmly.
Is there enough money there to be able to do a good enough job?
Could do with more. If you add up all the money that's available to the health economy in Greater Manchester, there is a big deficit there. That would be there whether we got the devolution or not. We believe that we're in a better position to deal with that, but obviously if we had more resources, that would make life easier.
Absolutely. And of course, healthcare is one of the areas that I know in the budget that we've talked about over the last couple of months, that is one of the areas where, certainly from Stockport Council's point of view, you're looking at being able to make savings by making changes.
Yes, we have to make savings by making changes. In many ways, to make the health service work the way that I think a lot of people in their hearts believe or hope it does work, which is much more together, so that if you've approached a health professional or social services because you need help, that they talk to each other, that they actually look at what is the best thing to do rather than it being very compartmentalised. People end up telling their story many times. They end up perhaps being bounced between, this is occupational health or this is the local authority. We want to try and end all that. So to actually make it much more efficient and work much more seamlessly as a single health and wellbeing service, which, as I say, I think most people actually hope it really is.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk a little bit about housing, because I know it's an area that you're particularly interested in. 495 new homes a year required in Stockport between now and 2020, at least.
At least.
Short of that number at the moment.
Yes, I mean, Stockport is not an area where it's easy to find housing. As a local authority, we're doing quite a bit in the town centre. There is clearly capacity within the town centre for very sustainable housing, very suitable for some people, not for all. We are looking for obviously people own sites. A lot of people have put forward sites potentially. Many of them are in the green belt. Most of them probably won't be suitable for development, but we always have to look for that. We have to balance the need to have housing for our younger people, for those who are coming in, housing for those of us who are getting older who want to move into more suitable accommodation as we get older. So we need all sorts of housing to actually support the economy, but it has to be in a sustainable way. People don't just live in houses. They live in homes, they live in communities, they need the schools, they need the the roads, they need the doctors, they need the shops, they need all the resources that you have to build a community.
Some of the headlines towards the end of last year were talking about Greater Manchester as a whole, but I guess Stockport certainly feeds into that, facing a housing crisis. Is that too strong, or is that a fair assessment?
I don't really like the word crisis, but certainly there is a very severe housing challenge. If you look at the number of houses built across Greater Manchester over the last few years, it's not very high. Most of those have actually been built by the social landlords, in fact, although as things change, that's going down. Greater Manchester as a whole needs more housing. One of the main things we're doing by looking at a Greater Manchester level is to rebalance that, so we don't just go, well, it's exactly the same for each of the 10 authorities. So to look at the availability of land, where people want to be and where we need the housing and where we do have that infrastructure or can put it in.
How do you... it's a problem that is not just local, it's a problem that's national as well, but how do you get, when planning permission's been granted and we see, don't we, sites sitting there waiting, and how do we solve that problem of getting sites built on once, that red tape almost has got out of the way? Well,
I'll start with the carrot. In Greater Manchester, we do have the Housing Growth Fund. So if the problem is access to finance, there is a loan fund which Greater Manchester can assist with. So we have that. We're working with central government to talk about the need on brownfield land. Everyone thinks it's good to build on brownfield land, and it is, but quite often there are extra costs. It can be contaminated, it can need extra work. That we may need to be able to find some grant funding. So we're working to try and do that. So to try and actually assist to bring forward sites which perhaps have got permission but don't stack up financially viably in the market. Those are what we're trying to do positively. On a personal level, I think that there is a difference in value in land once it's got planning permission, and land is then traded. And I would like the local authorities to be able to charge council tax on that land to actually reflect that increase in value, and that might help to bring forward actually getting the buildings done. But that's a personal opinion at the moment.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the green belt there. We've already seen things like Reddish Vale where there's been a lot of controversy. Could there be more development on green belt land?
Well, we know that there are parts of the green belt that people are looking at. One of the things that is happening across Greater Manchester is that there's actually being a review, an assessment of the green belt. That's partly because it's 30 years old and nobody's quite sure exactly where the boundaries are, because bits have been taken in, bits have been taken out over the years. And of course, buildings have been allowed some developments been allowed within the green belt over the years. So the first thing is to actually identify what green belt is legally identified as green belt in Greater Manchester, and what has actually been developed. And then I think we will need to look carefully. Some of the green belt is incredibly important and valuable in green belt terms. It separates, it gives that distinction to areas. Others of it, people are really surprised to find is in the green belt. And there is other parts of green space within our communities which is incredibly valuable, very important to local communities, but it's got no protection at all in planning law. And I think it's actually important that we actually find what's the land that's really important to communities and protect that, rather than just go by a 30-year-old designation. Greenbelt is very important, but we have to actually look at what's there. And there are some places that I'd rather see developed, just tidying up edges of the greenbelt, and places protected within communities.
Council tax rise this year.
Yeah.
Despite that, however, we've seen things like in the budget the cancellation of the community meals service, cuts to transport for young people with special educational needs, cuts of almost 50% in museums and the market. Massive changes, paying more, getting less.
Yeah, it's not a great position to be in, and it's not one that I think any one of the 63 councillors on Stockport or any other local authority wants to be in. There has been, we knew that the government was imposing further changes on local government. We knew that, we had planned for that. We were having the biggest in-year saving that the council has ever had to make, against the background of 4 years of previous cuts and more to come. And then we got a change in government policy where clearly the Treasury has recognised that they do need to raise more in taxes. They just don't want to do it themselves. So have basically rejigged the money coming to local government to say, well, OK, raise your council tax. And then, so by raising the council tax, we ended up exactly where we thought we were before that change of policy, not able to put much more back in. Some of these things that you've listed are actually real cuts. I wouldn't ever try and pretend that we are not reducing services and that in some cases we would not have done that. Others, though, we do need to do things differently. And for instance, the young people's transport to schools. A lot of money, a lot of effort has gone into helping young people to be independent. And actually, there have been some really good success stories where both the young people and their families have said, this is absolutely wonderful. You know, this young person is able to go out with their friends at weekends. They're much more independent rather than just being taxied backwards and forwards. So some change is necessary. You can't remain the same. But yes, it's not a happy situation. And I have to say that the way in which the announcements came out to local government make it very clear that the Treasury is assuming that council tax will go up every year for future years as well. We obviously are looking very carefully at what we can do and how we can do, you know, how we can mitigate that. But I have to say that is what the government's assumption is.
So we can expect further rises between now and 2020. That's
certainly what George Osborne is expecting.
Is it what you're expecting?
I think it will be very, very difficult for anyone to balance the budget, to continue to do the things that we need to do without further council tax rises, particularly for the health and social care side. I am hopeful that the work that we're doing with investing in Stockport, which as those, you know, as the hotel, as the office block actually come into use, they start to pay council tax, we get rent off them, you know, that actually some of these investments in Stockport will actually produce an income for the council, which will help to mitigate the need to, you know, get the money through the council tax, which is where the government is pushing us. So, but, you know, obviously there's a time lag between investing and getting an income in. But, you know, part of the investing in Stockport is to actually help the council to be more financially sustainable without being totally reliant on the council tax.